Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by energy and environment reporter Jeremy Beaman. Jeremy, Senator Joe Manchin, he's returned. He's come back to the fore. He has agreed to a deal, and it has major climate implications, at least climate policy implications. What are some of the things from the environmental policy perspective that have made it into this new Build Back Better-ish package?
Yeah, he said that whole thing, that whole brand is dead, and this new brand is all about inflation.
Right.
Which had been his going concern the
That's
whole time.
the new title of the bill.
That's the new title of the bill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. There are a lot of things, and the agreement that Manchin came to with Majority Leader Chuck Schumer that will satisfy green constituencies and much of the Democratic Party that had wanted to go really far and wanted to spend and invest a lot in green energy. There's money for tax incentives for producing solar panels, for building up factories to build solar panels, to deploy solar panels. There's electric vehicle tax credits for consumers, something Manchin had resisted earlier on in negotiations. So these are things that that Democrats had wanted and been pushing for. They would have probably liked more. Right. They would have liked more in general, but that's sort of the nature of the compromise.
And it's kind of been the nature of this whole process. It started out, we were talking about maybe a $6 trillion price tag. Then when it got into reality, we were closer to $3 trillion, $2 trillion, $1 trillion. But this isn't so much been about the top line numbers. This has been about a lot of the provisions that Manchin and fellow Democrats can agree on. From an energy and environment standpoint, what are some of the compromises that maybe the left has had to make as a result of this?
Some pretty big ones, I think. The reaction has been pretty positive to the bill overall. Climate groups and Democrats, many that I've seen speak on this have said it's sort of the best opportunity yet that Congress has offered to act on mitigating climate change, on emissions.
Right.
And so that's sort of been the broad reaction, but there are some things in the bill that really serve sort of fossil fuel interests.
Sure.
And will please Manchin. And those include an agreement on oil and gas leasing. There's one particular provision that would make the distribution of offshore wind leasing on actual oil and gas leases being carried forward and being held, lease sales being held. And so, as you know, President Biden, on his first week in office, tried to put a pause on all new leasing. He promised during the campaign to sort of crack down on offshore and onshore oil and gas leasing. And at this point in his presidency, that's not looking like it's going to happen because of court decisions, but also we have this new agreement that really is to sort of please Manchin. And there are a few other Democrats who want more offshore oil and gas leasing and onshore oil and gas leasing in order to sort of help tame energy prices longer term. It'll take some time, but they want to maintain fossil fuel production on federal lands. So that's the sort of a concession that's built into the bill that the objections that I've seen raised from climate groups so far mainly have been about that particular provision and that condition that's been built in.
Because Manchin, in his lengthy statement announcing the deal, talked about no arbitrary end to fossil fuels. Obviously represents an important fossil fuels state, a state where President Biden did not do very well in the election. But he also talked about this as an all-of-the-above approach, which frequently is a phrase used by Republicans when talking about energy production. So not necessarily on message for climate groups, even if it may be something that some of them are happy to see back in the discussion.
Yeah, the summary that the Majority Leader's office put out on the bill went through all the sort of the green energy stuff. It didn't mention the fossil stuff that was being done, understandably so.
I mean, Chuck Schumer is trying to reach a much different constituency.
Sure, that to be sure. But yeah, as you mentioned, Manchin sort of his takeaway on all this. Again, as you said, he's sort of whittled this thing down. And at every which way, and was able to achieve some of his priorities in the end. Since the war in Ukraine began, before then, but since the war in Ukraine began, he's really sort of used his chairmanship as head of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, very influential committee in the Senate, to talk about how the U.S. needs an energy policy that embraces domestic fossil fuel production. And again, he sort of won out on that priority. The Schumer and Democrats who come around on this, if they end up passing it, will have also made concessions on the fossil fuel front.
Right. So, I mean, part of the advantage they're going to have at this point is that a lot of Democrats had resigned themselves to there being no reconciliation bill passed, and to be clear, reconciliation is a process that allows bills to pass through the Senate without any Republican input and avoiding a filibuster, right? So it avoids the 60 vote threshold. So there was a lot of thought that there wouldn't be any reconciliation package at all, so that kind of maybe lowers the standards that maybe some on the left might have for it. They might want to get something. But there was also the possibility that there might be some executive action. A lot of rumors that we'd see some kind of national climate emergency. Does this going back into the legislative process make those types of things less likely?
I think as we sit here and speak, yes, for a moment in time, but as you said, it's been so stop and go. Manchin's been kind of capricious on some of this stuff and has made different justifications at different times to move forward or not move forward. I mean, as we said last week, we were talking about this climate emergency thing, the chances that it could happen. Biden was gearing up perhaps to do it. The White House said he wasn't taking it off the table. Basically, everyone thought that they were drafting something. They resigned to that this deal was not going to happen, and we have a deal now, and that was something like 10 days ago. So I think Schumer and Manchin, they did a good job of keeping this sort of at the chest and not. I mean, there are senators who are just seeing this language for the first time as we sit here yesterday. After it came out, like they didn't really know that this had been reached, I think. So there's a potential that Biden moves forward with more executive action, but this is what they had been working toward, and they're sort of considering it the victory now. If they lose the majority Democrats, who knows what will happen? Maybe Biden will come back and say more needs to be done. If Congress isn't going to work with him, Republicans in Congress aren't going to work with him. They have the majority, then maybe he comes back to a climate emergency in a situation like that.
And Biden has endorsed this bill.
Yes, he has, and it's, I think, a win for him in many ways, and he needs it. I think he needs it going into the midterms.
Now, there are some components to the bill that are sort of in flux. I mean, SALT and some of these other provisions. Are there any of the permitting or any of the other energy environment aspects of it that could be changed or really might be contested one way or the other?
Well, we're talking about contingencies. There was an announcement alongside the bill that later this year, sort of one condition of this agreement was that permitting reform measures would be also passed through Congress later. This has been a priority of Manchin's, again, who wants more pipelines being built to more easily transport natural gas to different parts of the country, especially like from West Virginia, which it's gas rich, to other parts of the country. So that's something that could come. That's permitting reform. I mean, there have been agreements between fossil industry groups and even renewable industry groups about the need for permitting reform, because it takes a long time, years, to stand up pipelines, get them permitted, as well as wind farms, things like that. And so that's sort of an agreement. Biden, even when he went to Massachusetts to speak about sort of actions he was taking in light of this deal supposedly being tanked, he called for permitting reform, even in order to facilitate more offshore wind. So I think we can expect to see some kind of agreement on that. I don't know how widely it will be supported, but that's apparently coming down the pipe too.
It's all up to the Joe in the White House and the Joe who's a Manchin.
That's right.
Thank you, Jeremy. You can read Jeremy and subscribe to our Daily on Energy newsletter at washingtonexaminer.com.